Hi, so today I am telling some stories about my friend Leo, and I thought I would do an introduction about, I guess, who he was to me. So, in the year 2000, I had lived with a lover who was a Leo, astrologically, named Robert, actually. And I lived with him in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. That was in 1999, actually. I've been living in Portland. Maybe I'll back up a little bit. So when I was living in Portland in 1999, everybody around me was talking about astrology. I didn't really believe in astrology. A few years previously in New York City, a friend of mine who had grown up in California had talked to me about astrology, and I was like, yeah, I don't really believe in that, but it kind of had set my mind to look out for it. And in Portland, everybody was talking about astrology all the time. And just from hearing it in the background, these stories of people talking about astrology, I started noticing patterns in my life, one of which, the pertinent one for this story, was that pretty much all the men I had fallen in love with at that point were Leos, astrologically. And I was specifically bruised at that moment from having fallen in love with somebody who was actually an Aries, and was like, well, Aries, well, that's weird, But I started looking at my astrology because all these people were talking about astrology, and I started noticing patterns. Like, all the people around me were Tauruses or Geminis, and then all these people I'd fallen in love with were were Leos, except this one Aries. And I was like, well, fire signs, maybe. And it started making sense when I looked at my astrology that there were all these things. And it kind of set me on this path that when I would meet people who were Leos and I had an understanding, I was like, oh, I have really good sex with Leos and I find them so dynamic and I totally fall in love with them. And I remember a nice wizardly elder, and he wasn't even old at the time. I was just very young. I don't even know if he's old now. I'm not going to say. But he had said, Vine, maybe the man of your dreams is not a Leo. Maybe you're not supposed to love Leos. And it was nice because I still kept falling in love with Leos all the time. I would meet Leos and I would just be totally overwhelmed with like passion and just being like, you're so amazing. Yeah, I've never had a boyfriend who's a Libra. It's very weird. I've never fallen, like the people I fall in love with, like Leos and Aquariuses, they're opposite for people who don't know or care about such things. And I certainly did not used to care about such things. Anyway, so this brings us to like 1999. I go to live with this guy who's a Leo in Arkansas, and it's the best sex I've ever had, and it's probably the best love affair I've ever had, in that I would see him across the room and just think he's so beautiful and he's my man, and I would sleep with him and actually cuddle, and I don't know. It only lasted 3 months, and again, I was totally heartbroken and decided I would never, ever, ever, ever have a relationship with a Leo ever again. I went to South Africa. I traveled around South Africa for a couple months. I came back to America. I went to go live in California in the mountains at this massage school commune called Heartwood, which made a big difference in my life because that's what gave me the confidence to sell massage, which is how I've paid for my existence for the last 15 years, or 16, 17 years. But while I was at this massage school commune, there were no gay people. Well, that was out. There were no gay men. There were a few lesbians that I would talk to. Maybe I'll tell a story another time about my astrology, and it's not, don't take any of it personally, you people who are not Leos. Yeah, and see, Joe, you're a wise one. Anyway, I was living at this massage school commune in Northern California, and there were no gay men there. There were just lots of beautiful hippie girls who thought I was very sexy and were constantly trying to have sex with me, which was totally understandable because you get like 80% female and lots of men, and not lots and lots of men, but lots and lots of females, and hippies up in the mountains, and at a massage school where we're all touching each other and doing yoga, and it was mostly clothing optional, so a lot of us were just like naked out in the forest a lot of the time. So yeah, a lot of the women were horny, and it was the first time in my life I had to constantly say, "I'm gay, I'm gay," which was funny because I'd never really had to do that. It was either just obvious, it was either an action that happened, or if there were girls that were trying to have sex with me, I'd just sidestep them, or I would sometimes tell them I was gay, but it just wasn't something I felt like I had to do as an identity politic to protect myself. So I give that little preamble because Heartwood also hosted this big gay men's gathering every winter. And so some gay men came through there, and there was one gay man living there when I first arrived, but he got kicked out shortly after I'd been there, who told me about this, and he showed me the flyer, and there was this long-haired dude with long hair, and he said, "Oh, you should meet up with him. You'd probably like him. He just came through here to visit me. His name's Kwai." So I got in touch with this guy Kwai, and Kwai introduced me to the Billies. This is all connecting to Leo, I promise you. My friend Leo, not astrological Leos. So Kwai came and visited me after he had gone up to Portland or somewhere to visit. Kwai is peripatetic. He still to this day travels constantly. Gemini, brother Gemini. He stopped back through Heartwood, and we spent a little bit of time together, and then drove me south to a Billy gathering at Saratoga Springs, once owned and run by a nice man named David Carroll, who is somewhere on Facebook that you can find him and say hello to. He's very sexy. And while I was at the Billy gathering down at Saratoga Springs, I was like, okay, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. And it was, I'd never done any fairy gatherings at this point, and Kwai said, oh, well, there's this other one in August, and you should really check that out. This is all kind of connecting, but I'm going to try to speed up through it. Introductions can be very long. I went up to this fairy gathering in August in Oregon, and got to see this whole world of gay men. And then when I went back to this little massage school commune where there were no gay men, I just kind of, it had been kind of nice to be celibate for a while. But then when I came back from the fairy gathering, I was like, okay, I really need some gay energy. I need some sex. I need some cuddling, or I'm gonna freak out. So some friends of mine in Oregon gave me a laptop that I think we had kind of stolen from some rich boy who one of my friends was going to school with, and nobody used it. So I took it back to this hippie commune thing that I was living at, and I got a job, not only doing whatever other jobs I was doing, which sometimes was installing carpet and taking out the trash, and then eventually working in the kitchen. I ended up getting a job where I got paid working in a little grocery store, health food store thing at the commune. And so I had keys to it, and late at night I would go in there with my laptop and look for men using the Bear websites like Bear 411, and had found out about this one called Eurobear. So I look in Eurobear, which is ostensibly a website about bears in Europe, but I search in the local area of where I was living, Northern California. I think I put a scope on of like 200 miles because I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I found Leo. I was just spent the last like 2 hours looking through my computer to see if I could find the first picture I took of Leo, or first picture I saw of Leo, but I could not find it. I did find some pictures that I later took of him to put on Eurobear, which I may post in a little bit. But I sent Leo a message, and we started chatting a little bit. Now, apparently, I was the first person who had ever contacted him through the internet. A friend of his from San Francisco said, Leo, if you want to go travel around Europe, you need to get on these websites so you can meet people. And Leo said, well, I've been traveling around Europe for many years, and I've always done a pretty good job of meeting people on my own. He had a lover in Berlin that he had met, I think probably at a bathhouse or at a gay bar, because he spent a lot of time exploring these kind of places around Europe. And he had been lovers with Bern, this guy in Berlin, for many years. Lovers as a friend, not as like a boyfriend coupling husband thing. And I believe the year I met Leo, or maybe the year before Baron had killed himself. So Leo was planning on going back to Europe for the first time since Baron had killed himself on a 4-month sabbatical. This was the year I met him. We started chatting. His friend had set up this Eurobear profile for him, and I was the first person who had contacted him ever through the internet. And I think this was like August. No, this must have been September. September we first started talking. And I rearranged my working schedule. I had to do a minimum of like 28 hours of work a week to pay for my room and board living at this massage school commune. I rearranged my working schedule so I could do all 5 shifts in 3 days, because I'm kind of extreme like that, but that gave me the rest of the week off. And a girl that I was friends with lent me a car, and I decided to drive down to Saratoga Springs for a Billy gathering for Halloween. Now, being the idealist I was at that age, this would be age 22, I believe, I assumed that the Halloween gathering would be on Halloween. But it happened over the weekend. Oh, hi, Robert. It happened over the weekend, and I arrived on Sunday, assuming that, actually that was the night of Halloween, and so I figured everybody would be staying over till Monday. But people had jobs they had to get to, and they had done all their Halloween celebrating Saturday night, and I was kind of bummed out by that. But I planned to meet Leo there, and so as I arrived, everybody was leaving, but Leo arrived mid-afternoon to meet me there. And we just kind of we're like, oh, hi. Oh, everybody's leaving. I was like saying hi and bye to people that I had met at the previous time I'd been there in July. And Leo knew a bunch of people, so I got to just watch him talking with people. And eventually, when it got quiet, we said, hey, well, do you want to go hang out in the hot tub or the pool together? He had a really nice hot tub. And we went and got naked and hung out in the water and started talking, just getting to know each other a little. And I remember being a little worried, I was like, well, I wonder if he's a Leo. And I asked him, I was like, well, your name is Leo, but are you a Leo? And he's like, no, I'm not a Leo. And I was like, well, what's your astrology sign? And he said, oh, I'm not going to tell you. And I was like, why are you not going to tell me? And he was like, well, whenever I tell people, they always say, oh no, that's the worst. You're the worst one. And I was like, I don't really believe that. Are you a Scorpio or something? And he said, no, I'm not a Scorpio. Do people think Scorpios are the worst ones? And I'm like, I don't know. It's a cliche. A lot of people say that. Are you a Pisces? And he's like, no, they're not the worst ones. They're nice, aren't they? And I'm like, I don't know. So this kind of went on for a while until eventually I got him to tell me when his birthday was. And he said, yeah, I'm a Gemini. And I said, fuck you, I'm a Gemini. They're not the worst one. Of course, a lot of people would disagree with that. But he invited me back up to his house, which he lived an hour away from there, south in the mountains. And again, I didn't know very much about him. I think after this boyfriend I had lived with in Arkansas, I had kind of put a kibosh on getting to know people online, because I had had this experience where I thought I knew him really well through the computer, and then actually spending time with him as a person was challenging, because we had all these ideas of who we were that didn't sync up with who we actually were, but who we had presented ourselves to be through the internet. And many of you who have met people on the internet may have had this experience. So when I met people on the internet, and still to this day, I don't try to get to know them. I just, if I have an affinity with them, I just chat a little bit about stuff. I don't try to get to know them very well, and I'm like, well, let's meet, and then we'll actually get to know each other. So we go back to his house. I knew very little bit about him. It was a beautiful cabin in the mountains. He said, okay, I'm going to start making dinner. Can you make a fire? And he had this big, beautiful fireplace. So I start making this fire, and he's making dinner, and I'm, building the fire, and the fire gets going, and I look around. He's got these beautiful big bookshelves, and there's art around. And I look at the bookshelves, and I notice there's a lot of books about Christianity, like studying Christianity. And there's many different versions of the Bible. And I look at the art, and it's not just art; it's a lot of Christian art. And there's crosses everywhere. And I'm like, oh no, oh no. And he sticks his head out to ask me some question from the kitchen. And I look around at him, and I was like, hey, by the way, do I have to call you father? You know, making an allusion to the fact, like, are you a priest? And he kind of smiled in this incredibly mischievous grin that he was very good at, and said, well, not unless you're into that sort of thing. So he had dinner at a point where he was like, we'll eat afterwards, but I need to go do mass. He was the kind of priest who had a chapel built next to his house in the mountains and did mass for himself twice a day. So he went out to do mass, and the neo-hippie that I was like, well, it's Halloween, which means it's Samhain, which means the veils are very thin, which means I should do a ritual. I had bought some birch beer because I had gotten into the Oghams, actually through my lover, Robert. I had gotten into the Oghams, and I had this understanding that Halloween was one of the times people celebrated New Year's, but definitely endings, and you have to end properly before things can begin. So I decided I was going to do a ritual with the birch beer, having this whole thing about going into the darkness in the forest. So I walked away from all the light, went into the forest, and did a ritual of releasing my past so that I could have a new beginning, which is something I did very frequently in those years of my life. And Leo did his special Halloween night Vespers. It probably wasn't special, it was just Vespers. I know All Souls Day is the next day, but the first day we met was Halloween, so it was nice. We always celebrated our anniversary on Halloween. And I guess one of the first things we did together, you know, besides hanging out naked in a hot tub and talking, before we had any sex or before we ate meals together or anything, we did rituals separately on Halloween evening, and then went back and had a big fire. And he came and visited me a few times while I lived up at Hartwood. I remember he took me up to a little motel on the coast somewhere near the redwoods or in the redwoods, and it was a lot about food and wine. He took me to visit some other people that other friends had introduced me to, these two gay guys who lived out in the middle of the forest, which I think was only the third time we'd been together, and I was learning Reiki and trying to do Reiki on all of them in the hot tub, and we'd been drinking home-brewed raspberry beer and smoking pot or something, and when he got out of the hot tub, he passed out. And I was like, oh my God, is this guy gonna die? Very early in our friendship, I was like, holy shit, is this guy gonna die? You know, he got up out of the hot tub and collapsed onto, I thought he had a heart attack or a stroke or something. And I was like, are you okay? And I tried to help him up, and he was like, oh, I'm fine. I was like, maybe you should just lay here and rest. He was like, no, I'm fine. I was like, you just passed out. And he was like, no, I just needed to take a nap. So I laid down because I knew I was really tired and I just needed to rest a moment. And I was like, okay. So he went to get up again, and he stood up and immediately fell back over, and the exact same conversation happened. I was like, Leo, you just passed out. And he was like, no, I didn't. I knew I was gonna fall over, so I sat down, and then I closed my eyes for a moment because I needed to rest. And this was very confusing to me because I was like, wow, you're believing this story to, anyway, okay. But it immediately put this thing in me that I was like, oh my God, is this guy gonna die on me? And he was only 54 when I met him. But, you know, age is very different for a lot of people. Everybody ages differently. But shortly after all this, he went away on sabbatical for 4 months to Amsterdam. I guess it wasn't that shortly after. We spent time together. I went to Mongolia. That summer. I shaved my head for my 23rd birthday. This gets into 2001. Maybe I'll go back and tell that story a little bit. Well, no, I'll finish this. Blah, 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 left the massage school commune, traveled with Kwai. We decided to do something. We decided to do something else. We ended up going to Mongolia for 2 months. And when I came back, the whole September 11th thing happened in America, in the face of the world. It kind of changed. I mean, literally happened like a week after we got back from Mongolia. And then Leo went to Europe for 4 months and had said, you can stay at my cabin. So I went to stay at his cabin in the mountains, which was an Episcopal Franciscan hermitage that had its own chapel next to it that he had built. And I stayed there for 3.5 months while he was gone, and emailed with him occasionally, and was mostly just alone in the mountains, wondering what the hell to do with America, and deciding I was going to give up on America and go live in Europe. So after a short stint of traveling with a Radical Fairy friend to Hawaii and returning with him to Seattle, I flew from there to Amsterdam. Thinking I would only spend a few weeks in Amsterdam, having absolutely no interest in Amsterdam. I thought I would just be with Leo in Amsterdam, and then we would travel, which we did. We traveled around a little bit, Ghent and Bruges and Brussels and Eindhoven for the Vagavoer, if any of you knew what that was. Then he went back to America, and I decided I was going to stay in Europe. I had this whole idea. I was going to stay for 5 years at least. I was going to travel around for a year, visit my ancestral homelands, find a boyfriend, learn a new language, and maybe get married or something and just live in Europe. That's not what happened. My relationship up till then with Leo, I just thought he was nice and he was a friend and I liked him. And there wasn't anything... I never lived in Seattle. I just visited. Yeah, my relationship from meeting Leo on the internet, spending time with him, even though we had rituals and so on and so forth, there was, a very nice physical relationship and friendship and sensuality. I didn't have any romantic whatever the first year I knew him. But after traveling around Europe with him, and it was only 2 weeks, but after traveling around Europe with him, and he left and went back to America, which I was very heartbroken about. He was very heartbroken about, actually. That was the point I was making, that when he left to go back to America, he looked like he had a death sentence. He was so heartbroken. And there was this whole drama I had to do with his partner. He had a partner at the time in San Francisco who was very jealous of me, and I literally had to email him and say, listen, motherfucker, you better go meet Leo at the airport. And he did. And things kind of worked out with them for another year before it fell apart. But after Leo left me in Amsterdam, I was like, I became totally, I guess I realized I loved him. I guess I realized, whatever that means, when you realize you love someone, when you feel like, wait a minute, my life is so much better when they're in my life than when they're not in my life. Because I was a traveler when I was young and I was always leaving, that happened somewhat frequently, but with a lot of people, I didn't spend a lot of time with them, so it was easy to let go of them. After knowing Leo a little over a year, and it was really the traveling Europe with him, I was like, wow, this guy's really, and I was just going to say the word rich. It was funny. This guy's really rich. Not in money at all. Leo, not in money at all, but rich in culture, rich in personality, rich in wisdom, knowledge. One of the things that I came to really love about Leo was everybody that I'd been with before then, they'd kind of fallen into the trap of trying to ingratiate themselves to me, trying to make me like them, which is something we all do with people. We want them to like us, and especially if we're trying to have a boyfriend with somebody, we want them to like us, and so we sometimes do things to try to make them like us. And Leo didn't really do that, or he never had an insecurity about it. He would do. What I'm trying to say is that everybody I'd been with before then fell into the pit of taking it personally if they tried to please me and I wasn't pleased, and then they'd be hurt, and then there'd be this insecurity thing. And Leo never did that. Leo was always very who he was, and very confident and secure in himself. And when I talked with him, whenever I would spiral into some kind of internal turmoil drama in myself, I was 22, he would never get caught up in it. He would always be very clear about what was my stuff and what was his stuff. And that was really, really attractive to me at the time. I traveled around Europe for a year, 2002, the entirety of 2002. I was traveling around Europe for a year, but one of my other best friends, who I'd been best friends with for 5 or 6 years, he came and surprised me in Europe and then begged me to return to America to help him with his father who was dying. And I ended up doing that, and I got to spend time with Leo again, and it was such a lovely returning. So I'm going to tell more stories about Leo, but he wrote a memoir, and I like the idea of reading his memoir. My initial idea was to read his memoir first before telling my story about him, to let him tell his story first, but this doesn't need to be linear. Still, I'm very clear that I don't want to just talk unendingly for 6 hours, so I'm going to log off periodically, post some pictures of him, and then log back on and tell some more stories. And they probably won't even be linear. I might be like, oh yeah, I remember this other story that happened in this other time that I already started talking about. But yeah, I'll post some pictures, and then I'll come back, and I think I'll just start reading his memoir. And I may do that in 2 segments. I don't know how long it will take me to read it. And then it doesn't really matter how many people watch this while I'm doing it. This day is just the day that I'm dedicating to Leo. So today would have been Leo's 70th birthday, which I said earlier in my first one. Yeah. So I'm just dedicating the entire day to spending the day with Leo, and we'll see what comes of that. But the videos will be there even if you don't watch them live. And then maybe I'll do something with them later. Thank you for your attention and care.